Therapists, what is something people are afraid to tell you because they think it's weird, but that you've actually heard a lot of times before? First story. Intrusive thoughts. Nearly everyone has thoughts about pushing the old lady onto the subway train, swerving into opposing traffic, or stabbing their loved one in the stomach while cooking dinner with them. Some folks, however, take these thoughts very serious that believe that they might act them out. It's called thought-action fusion. Most of us are able to brush them off, though. Story number 2. I have heard some variant of, "This is probably weird, but I feel if I am my true self around others then they won't like me more times than I can count." As I explore the formative situations to this belief alongside my clients, it definitely pulls at my heartstrings. Story number 3. The amount of people I see who feel like they should be grieving a certain way and are afraid that they must not have loved someone, or must not have cared. People grieve in all sorts of ways. The 5 stages of grief are crap. I was consulting with another clinician who was seeing a couple whose daughter had died. The wife was convinced that the husband must not have cared about her because he wasn't grieving out loud. In reality, while she had been going to support groups and outwardly expressing, he had been continuing to work in a garden that him and his daughter had kept when she was alive, using that time to process and grieve as he did. Both were perfectly fine ways of grieving. However, it is expected that one's grief is more than the other. They both ended up working it out, however, he driving her and others to their weekly support group, her attempting to work in the garden with him on the condition that they didn't talk. Really sweet. To that same extent, the amount of people who are unaware of their own emotions and emotional process is astounding. So many people feel only angry or happy and worry something must be wrong with them otherwise. Normalizing feeling the whole gamut is just as important. Recognizing what we're feeling as well as what it feels like in our body when we're feeling is incredibly helpful for understanding how we process and feel. As a whole, how we treat emotions as a society is kinda messed up. I would say a common one is believing that there's something innately, irreparably wrong with them that makes them unable to ever truly fit in. For a lot of people, it's such a deeply ingrained belief that it can be extremely painful to acknowledge or express, regardless of the level of personal success in their lives. Story number 5. 2 topics come up with regularity. When someone discloses to me that they were actually abused as a kid, and or when someone is experiencing suicidal ideation. Both are something I hear from clients every single day, and so I don't find it weird at all. But when I have someone in front of me who's talking about it for the first time, I know it's important to validate the fact that even though I might be talking about this for like the 5th time that day, they have never talked about this ever, and are in need of gentle care to feel safe. Next story. That they do not know what they enjoy doing. Often they have people in their life, including therapists, say try to do something fun today or ask what do you like to do when you have free time. Many people I work with do not know what those are. Once I explain that I dislike these statements/questions because they assume people should know the answer, and that many people don't, I can watch as they relax, take a deep breath, and say something to the effect of "Oh my, that's so good to hear. I have no idea what I like to do." That's part of the problem. More often than not, they feel like they should know and that everyone else their age has it figured out. They are embarrassed to say that they don't know when in fact not knowing is very common. I couldn't even try to count how many clients I've had this conversation with. Story number 7. A common one in the time I was a therapist was simply "I don't know." You'd be surprised how reluctant people are to admit that they don't know why they're feeling how they are. But that's exactly why you're, or were, I'm not a therapist anymore, sat there with me, so we can figure out why together. It always put me in mind of a line from America by Simon and Garfunkel. "Kathy, I'm lost," I said, though I knew she was sleeping. "I'm empty and aching and I don't know why." Story number 8. Unwanted intrusive thoughts are normal and do not mean you are a bad person. By definition, these are thoughts that are unwanted because they go against your own values and highlight what you don't want to do. For example, a religious person having unwanted blasphemous images pop into their mind, or a new parent having unwanted sexual thoughts about their new baby. However normal these thoughts are, over 90% of the population, the moral nature of these thoughts mean that often people experience a lot of shame and take many years before they first tell someone about them. 9th story. That they don't like their family members, are angry, want to stop communication with their parents, etc. I work in a country which is more culturally collectivist, so not wanting anything to do with your parents makes you an a-hole in the current cultural sense. We deal with this almost on a daily basis. There is deep and profound shame in this, and when we find that line of "oh, it might be that your parents are toxic to your mental well-being, trigger your trauma," many of my clients actually get visibly angry with me. Cultural psychology is so important, cause when I first moved here I had my American European hat on. Oh boy, did I need to adjust. Story number 10. Clients become quite fearful of admitting that they weren't successful since the last time they had a session. This could include not succeeding in using a coping skill that they're learning about, or not being able to complete a homework assignment I gave them. Humans aren't robots, and therapy is a lot of work. That being said, I don't expect people to be perfect as they start to work on themselves in a positive way. It takes time to really commit to change, especially in relation to trauma or conflicted views that an individual holds. I feel as if the client doesn't want to let me down as their therapist, but these failure events are just as important to talk about as successful moments. Story number 11. Some of the most common ones have been visual and/or auditory hallucinations and suicidal thoughts. I usually hear I don't want to be put in the hospital, or I don't want you to think I'm crazy. Also, basically anything sexual. I'm not going to judge you for being into this kind of stuff. Honestly, I've probably heard it before and I'm not here to judge you. Same goes with any non-consensual experiences, especially if we're working through trauma. Story number 12. Usually it's sex-related. Shame about their desires or kinks is common. Gender questioning is another. Some people are ashamed of things they did in childhood or adolescence, haven't ever told anyone and think the teen will be horrified. We have heard everything. I'm always compassionate and always understand why we do the things we do. I've yet to have anyone bring something I can't get. Next story. Hidden sexual dreams and fantasies about family members. More common than people think, and often stays that way and doesn't really interfere in the person's close relationships unless they allow it. Many things we dream or think are unconscious and involuntary, and the root of such things is often nonsensical. Next story. A lot, and I mean a lot, of people who experience sexual abuse feel very guilty for a myriad of reasons that are not their fault. 1. Guilty for attracting the attention. 2. Guilty for not speaking up. 3. Guilty for enjoying being seen by someone. 4. Guilty for having any sort of pleasure from their abuse. All those feelings are common and addressed in therapy, but it is so hard for people to discuss it. Let's get to the next story. Many of my clients lived through severe childhood trauma and neglect. They had no one to model or explain healthy emotions or to show them appropriate ways to react to stress, fear, anger, etc. Most often they'll describe a completely normal reaction to a stressor, and then follow that up with "I don't know if that's normal." These are adults who were exposed to so much dysfunction during their formative years that they don't know whether it's normal to cry when they're anxious or afraid, feel angry when their boundaries have been violated, etc. Story number 16. Being tired of being a mother. There's this social thing of loving your kids and they should be the first thing in your life. But having a child is messy and a real hard work. It's normal to just want to take a break once in a while from all that responsibility. Let's get to the next story. OCD gets misunderstood a lot. It's not just having a clean house or liking things to be organized. Common intrusive thoughts can include violent thoughts of harming children and other loved ones, intrusive thoughts of molesting children, fear of being a serial killer, etc. My clients can feel a lot of shame when discussing the thoughts or worry I will hospitalize them. Story number 18. I work with a lot of anxiety and trauma clients. Whenever I ask if they would describe their experience as being anxious about being anxious, I get a lot of OMG, yes. Anxiety has such a physical impact in the body, heart pounding, trouble breathing, feeling faint or cold, tunnel vision, that we become aware of our body's reaction before we even notice the anxious thoughts triggering the reaction. Then we panic about why our bodies are flipping out when we're not even aware of feeling threatened, and the anxiety compounds on itself. Anxiety is like an alarm system in our bodies to signal the presence of real or perceived danger. What would you do if your alarm was going off at your house? Check to see if there's a real threat. Scan your environment situation to ground yourself in the present. Turn off the alarm. Breathing exercises do help, along with mindfulness techniques like body scans, and then investigate what tripped the alarm. Process thoughts around the situation that read like danger to you. It's also important to note that danger doesn't need to be a gun getting pulled on you. Panicking during a presentation that could impact your job and threaten the way you pay your bills and afford your life can feel pretty dangerous if you think about it. Let's get to the next story. Recurring intrusive thoughts about harming others can be heard in killing someone or sexual fantasies about children or relatives. Usually people take a while to admit those. The reality is that if you are having them frequently, you aren't dangerous. You probably have OCD and are terrified that you might be dangerous. Story number 20. I work in an older adult service for people with dementia and mental health problems. I see a lot of family members, carers, feeling ashamed of the fact that they are finding it incredibly difficult to care for someone that has dementia or a chronic mental health problem. Carer burnout is a real issue, and people need to know that it's not easy to see someone you love struggling every day, or slowly fading away month by month. Carers and family members desperately need time for themselves and need to know that it's okay to feel the way that they do. No one is superhuman, and we all have our own needs. It's why we have therapy groups for carers. It's okay to struggle to look after someone, and you should in no way feel ashamed of having those feelings. Next story. that they hear voices. I've found that a lot of people aren't familiar with their own internal dialogue or self-talk, and that this is typically normal internal processing. A lot of people think that they are hearing voices and hallucinating. There are some pretty simple questions we can ask to determine if it's hallucinating or just internal dialogue, and most often it's the latter. Next story. I'm support worker, social worker, not a therapist. I've had clients too scared to tell me their accomplishments because they think they should only be bringing their problems to case management, and that if we see them getting better that we won't prioritize them as much. Another is hard drugs. We don't endorse it by any means, but we have to know if we need to keep an eye out for inappropriate behavior and overdoses. We never get mad at them for being high. We just want to send them to their room to sober up. Story number 23. Intrusive thoughts about sex with family members or, in their mind, nymphomania as a result of childhood sexual trauma and adult. Hypersexuality isn't often discussed as one of the PTSD symptoms, so people walk around with so much shame about it. Let's get to the next story. When I was in private practice, I specialized in borderline personality disorder. I did DBT, which is the evidence-based treatment for it, but there is so much shame and stigma around having BPD. I have seen providers hesitate to diagnose it. My favorite sessions were the ones where I would talk about why and how people get BPD, and seeing the relief on people's faces when a therapist can see that this is also something happening to them, and that there is a type of therapy specifically designed to help. Those were my favorite sessions. And to answer the question correctly, BPD is much more common than people think. Next story. Did clinical work for about 5 years and heard just about everything 10 times over. But seriously, people are often reluctant to talk about their darker urges and feelings. Therapy is likely the only chance where you'll get to have that conversation openly and honestly. Therapists know everyone has this side to them, and working on it is both difficult and admirable. Let's get to the next story. Hello, therapist here. There are several. 1. Speaking to their departed loved ones. Thankfully, theories now support this and don't consider it to be a sign they're not moving on with their lives. I encourage my clients to explore the continuation of their relationships with the deceased. 2. Small ways they've made progress in the week. I know this isn't technically weird, but my clients sometimes don't want to tell me this, either because they fear I would turn around and say they don't need therapy anymore, or because I might find the progress unnoteworthy, both of which are totally untrue. 3. That they're having bizarre intrusive thoughts of hurting themselves, others, sexual fantasies, and so on. As a therapist, I'm trained to appreciate the whole world that lies between thoughts and action, and all it really proves is that we have an imagination. It's highly unlikely I'll need to break confidentiality, and won't call the police immediately. Story number 27. Sexual side effects of medication. Losing your sex drive is a common effect of SSRIs, and when I meet with patients after they've been prescribed, I'll ask about whether they've noticed a difference. Often they have but are worried about telling their prescriber. I will advocate for them to do so, and it is usually a positive experience for them. Next story. I'm usually more afraid that I'm boring them. Oh, you have anxiety about your normal job and normal family, and we've been talking about it for a year now? Let's party! Story number 29. Finishing up my doctorate in clinical psychology and primarily work doing forensic assessments, anything from insanity competency evaluations to abused children who should be excused from testifying. There's a lot of people who have experienced sexual abuse and are ashamed to talk about it, particularly in regard to how it affects their current sexual functioning. Also, self-harm is a big one people tend not to want to discuss as well, but is incredibly common in this line of work. Honestly, after a client in my first year of practicum work told me he was collecting roadkill and fantasized at length about murdering specific people in his life, I was fairly desensitized. Still get the shivers thinking about that client. He was so profoundly creepy in a very genuine way that I'm not sure I can accurately describe on Reddit. Really ripped the band-aid off with that one. Story number 30. Licensed professional counselor here. Pretty much everything. But a common one is secret feelings. Secret resentment towards a spouse or the difficulties of being a parent. Lost attraction in a spouse. Private daydreams and sexual fantasies. Next story. Not exactly an answer to this question, but something that I think is really important to this thread, is talking about how they feel about me. I do my best to check in regularly about how clients feel about me, how I'm doing as a therapist, whether they are getting what they need, etc. It's really important to know for the wellness of clients whether they are getting their needs met. Many people have difficulty directly saying how they feel about another person for fear of making the other person, me, feel bad. It's important to be able to do this though, since it's how you learn to advocate for and manifest your own needs, which is in many cases the point of therapy. Hey, thanks for subscribing and liking, it really means a lot to me. While you are here, feel free to hop on over to the last video. See you there.